let us take up one last topic of the planning part today. So we'll discuss transportation execution, monitoring related aspects. Even we'll touch upon some topics related to event management, so that we are aware of what's happening there. And then we'll briefly touch upon the new tool called Global Track and Trace. So we'll just try to understand what that is all about. So let us jump into the execution part. So typically what happens so far is that so you have the requirements in the form of the freight units, as we're talking about the shipper scenario. And so we get these freight units from the from the sales order or delivery or so, and then these freight units are maybe consolidated or depending upon the product or so. You process the freight order, and while the freight order is assigned, while freight units are assigned to the freight order, there are a lot of things which happen. I mean, you have, freight settlement, charge calculation, so on and so forth. They do happen. Carrier assignment, maybe tendering, all that kind of stuff. But then there is one element which also happens, and that is pretty important, because it's all about what you call the tracing of what's happening with that particular product, right from the moment it is, even before releasing it to maybe warehouse, even before loading it, what's happening with that particular material or with that product, and all the way until it is delivered. How do we treat that in export scenario or import scenario, or things like that? So that's important, because actually in practically the transportation department, the transportation department, planning department also, where you find transportation planners, people who do paperwork, people who do processing activities, people who do updates.
Satish, take this side. Your voice is not audible to me.
Hello, yeah. Why is it not audible?
Yeah, for us it's okay. At least I am able to hear properly.
I have increased the volume. I don't know if it is okay now.
This is okay right now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. So the concern, or not concern, the importance of this topic is more from the perspective of updating the status from stage to stage. So from, state to state, not just from stage to stage, but state to state from various perspectives. So we need to understand what are those perspectives, what are those statuses, and how things are moving and all. So typically, this is quite a activity which probably can be handled within the freight order as a manual event updates, or it also can be handled with the SAP event management as a separate application or a tool with integration with transportation management. So let us see what are all the aspects which are within this execution related aspects, and then try to understand the event management architecture, what really happens there, and then try to understand what's the track and trace. So let's jump into it. So Typically, when we talk about transportation execution, one of the things, there are two things which are very important as for what I have learned in terms of this functional area. One is about the product itself. I mean, physical movement of the product is something which need to be tracked. Um, that is one aspect anyway. Apart from that, it is the process movement or the activities which happen from a documentation point of view. So these are the two things: the product movement and then the process movement, or rather process activities. These are the two aspects which will trigger certain changes, from step to step. So essentially, the objects which are to be considered for event tracking, they could be from a process perspective, like process in the sense, it could be like you want to track, say, freight order, or you want to track, whatever document it is, freight unit or whichever is applicable, or you could track a particular container or a handling unit or things like that. So that those are the trigger points for any person to report the status of tracking. And then the entire cargo handling, the entire, let us see also the supply chain events from end to end, how they will, I mean, what are the things which can be tracked. And most importantly, the start of human and automated updates. So this is one area where there is employees will have roles to play. So they will have roles to play. They'll have responsibilities to update the status. They probably will take some certain list maybe at the end of the day, and then review certain discrepancies or those kind of stuff, and any compliance related issues. They will look at it and all that, and they have to maintain this sort of data which is generated either from a manual tracking or automated updates and all that, so that if there is any audit trial needs to be done from time to time, they will be able to look into those issues. So this becomes quite critical from that standpoint. Although it is not directly an activity of the end-to-end process, but then it's one of the very important administrative activities which need to be there. And typically from that standpoint, you have the freight orders, which we have gone through, document normal creation of freight orders, and then one of which is very important topic, which we will just discuss in a while from now, is about discrepancies. So what happens is that when does a discrepancy occur is important. So normally discrepancies, nobody wants discrepancies, first of all, but then something will go wrong as always, right? So then how do you handle that particular situation? So why these discrepancies typically happen is maybe it's just a manual human error, right? So you have, say, some quantity loaded to be loaded in the truck, but then the quantity is less, or quantity has to more quantity has to be taken, or whatever. So what happens is that typically when you tell the carrier to, hey, you take this particular freight order and execute it. When you do that, typically what you do is you probably are clear in terms of your quantities, in terms of your price, in terms of your whatever, the charges, things like that. And then you discuss with the carrier and say that, well, this is what it is. And the carrier accepts it. Okay, that's perfectly all right. Then he probably gets a truck, and then he sort of gets the things loaded. So in that process, if there is any discrepancy in terms of maybe a quantity or any other discrepancies, are there, then he has to raise a flag. Then he has to say, hey, this document is not there, or this quantity is less or why? Because he would, this will, all these things are subject to, statutory or checking, which happens